Hey everybody, welcome to Tabletop Voices. My name is James Introcaso, and today we are talking with an amazing person in our tabletop gaming community. I'm so excited to have Hadeel here. She will be taking your questions, so get those down in the chat right now, and we'll get them recorded and we'll get them at the end. But first, I have many questions, and I go by he, him. And why don't you introduce yourself, Hadeel? Tell people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Hadeel al-Massari, she, her. I am an actual player. I think that's what they're called now. It's like a whole thing with like how esports doesn't have a little e anymore. I don't know. I stream twice a week. Well, now 3 times a week. And I talk about tabletop on Twitter, and I make extra 5e content as well. So all sorts of things that I do.
Yes, yeah, you wear many, many hats, and I'm super excited to talk about all of them. It feels like everybody has to do more than one thing these days in the world of tabletop, and really in all worlds, because everything is insane. And we get passionate about our projects for sure. So how did you start playing tabletop RPGs? Take me back to, the first game. What were you playing? What game was it? How did it go?
Well, if we're talking about tabletop in the traditional sense, like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Warhammer, that kind of thing, I don't have to go back very far because the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons was this February. So, very new. But it's one of those things where I drank the Kool-Aid and I got all of the good bits at the bottom. So, like, my Kool-Aid was stronger than everybody else's somehow. But yeah, that's when I started playing, was for Trapped in the Birdcage. Episode 1 was the first time I'd ever played Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I think you have such a unique experience because Trapped in the Birdcage was your first experience. Not only were you streaming, you were streaming on the D&D channel, like with a built-in big audience. What was that like when you sat down to play? Did you have experience before that streaming?
Not in that, not in an audience like that. I had streamed a couple times on Twitch, but not like to more than 5 people at a time, probably. But Holly reached out to me. She's like, I want to do this thing. And I'm like, cool. If it is anything like my projects, then it will never happen. Like, no offense to Holly. It's all me. This is a me problem where I'm like, oh, what a fantastic idea. I will table this and then never do it. And then I want to say like a week later, she's like, okay, we start on Thursdays. See you then. I was like, well, fantastic. And I want to say like the first episode, there was like 1,200 people watching, and I'm like asking what die I'm supposed to be using, and I'm like, what is an insight check? Like just asking all of these other questions. But Jimmy had never played either, so I felt a little better about it. So yeah, it was a trial by fire, perhaps would be the best way to put it.
Definitely. And Holly Conrad, who was your GM, had been playing on Dice Camera Action as Strix for a while, before she started Trapped in the Birdcage. But how did you know Holly? How did you all become friends?
Holly and I have been friends for a number of years, and it's mostly like convention circuit type deals. And we have a lot of friend of a friend type situations going on. I met her initially, I want to say, when I was working at Nintendo, and I was having discussions with like Jared and Ross about some projects that Nintendo was going to be doing, but then they didn't do them, and that's the whole thing. But I think that's how I met her. It feels like forever ago, but now she's like one of my best friends. We have matching tattoos, so I feel like we're at that level now where I can say she's a best friend. But yeah, we just liked a lot of the same things, and we had always talked about D&D, but it was one of those things where I'd never like pursued it.
Wow. I mean, matching tattoos, it doesn't get stronger than that. I think when it comes to relationships, that's a pretty permanent decision, and pretty awesome that you are so close. So how did you feel after that first time? You know, you talked about getting all the good bits in the Kool-Aid. Like, did you just want to play immediately again? Did it take one or two more games before you felt that way? How strong was that feeling?
It was immediate. Like, after our first game, I was like, guess I better devote my life to this now. Like, it was one of those things where, like, I've liked stuff, and I've, like, deeply liked things, but I've never felt the way I feel about Dungeons & Dragons with literally anything. And I've tried all sorts of stuff. Like, I used to be fairly into cosplay. Never liked it as much as I like D&D. There are some, like, sports that I've done. Never liked them as much as I like D&D. So yeah, I was like, this is it. This is the thing. This is the purpose, which sounds very dramatic. I'm very dramatic. I'm a Pisces, so I'm very dramatic. I was like, this is the thing. I had to get more of it immediately.
Wow. Yeah, I totally understand that feeling, and I bet most of the people watching do as well. Is like, this is the hobby, this is the thing that I love, and I'm a Libra, so you know I'm very not passionate. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to play these things, and it's also a lot of fun to share it with other people. And so, what was it like, you know, being thrown into the D&D community, especially coming from the video game community?
It was like night and day. It was peak and anti-peak if you're in Sigil, but basically coming from video games and anything revolving around a AAA studio is a nightmare. I'm just gonna throw it out there. It doesn't matter which one it is. Nintendo's very interesting, and tabletop community, at least how the people that reached out to me afterwards were super welcoming. They're very warm. They're very nice, and I really enjoyed it. And I know it sounds like kind of maybe not as descriptive as I could be, but that's what it is. Like, I very, very quickly after playing my first game found a community that I could legitimately enjoy, instead of being like, oh, I have like more than 2 Twitter notifications. What did I do wrong? Who's yelling at me now? Now I can check my Twitter notifications, and it's like people showing me fan art, or like somebody made me a playlist for Nejma, or just saying nice things. I had a bad day the other day, and everybody was like, I had an army of people who were like, we think the things you're doing are really cool. And I've never had that before. That's probably why I like D&D so much.
That's beautiful. That's really, really wonderful. And since Trapped in a Birdcage, you've like you've said, you've expanded your streaming horizons. You stream a lot. You've played other games. What other shows have you been on since Trapped in the Birdcage?
On Sundays, I'm on Hell's Bells, and that's pretty cool. It's an all-tiefling party. And then on Wednesdays, I play the Star Trek RPG by Modifius. I think Modifius, called Deep Space Fine. And I don't know if it hasn't been announced, so I'll wait. I'm sure it'll be announced on Monday.
Gotcha.
We'll find out.
Gotcha. That's good. That's a good tease.
Something else. I'll be on something else soon, and then the projects just keep on coming. So I've been streaming a lot. I've been playing a lot of D&D, even like off of a stream. I play a game at my current job. I like time to play D&D at work, I guess. So yeah.
Have you introduced other people to role-playing games now that you have sort of been bit by the bug?
I have. It's more of like a force thing. I'm like, you have to, or you can't be my friend. You have to play D&D or you can't be my friend. But I know that there was, like, when I first started at where I am now, there were some people talking about like possibly doing a D&D game, and there were people who had never played. I was like, you have to play now. You have to play with me now. So I've tried to get some other people involved, and they don't seem as interested, but I'll just wear them down. So I'll get there.
Hey, that's a great way to go. You know, eventually they will play with you, or they will find new jobs. So you know, that's how you get them. Just wear them down, slow and sure, and then eventually they're like, "Fine, I'll play your dumb game." right?
Yep.
So you also said, that at the beginning, you obviously, like most of us, are lost in how does this work? Which dice do I roll? What is an insight check? How does all that work? And now you've made the shift. You said you've, worked on some things, written some things that you're putting out into the world. What are you working on, and how have you found that?
Well, after I played a couple of games, I was really intrigued by the whole rules aspect of it, like how the mechanics. I really enjoy the mechanics and learning about them. My good friend Lisa Chen always is available for me to ask mechanics questions too, and I feel like every time we talk, I learn something new about it. But I take great pleasure in reading through the books, just cover to cover, and trying to figure out, like, I have this idea for something, like, how could I make it work in this rule set? And the Project Bramblefoot Adventures that Kayla Klein and I do, she illustrates and I write both the mechanics and the flavor text. It came out of a need for more, like, legitimate all ages content. The books say that it's like ages 12 to 1,000, but sometimes it like, if I read through the book, I know that as somebody that has a background in education, that a 12-year-old is not going to be able to understand this, and sometimes it's not entirely appropriate either. So we wanted to make stuff that was more geared towards children, and taking mechanics that are already in play, and then I don't want to say dumbing it down, making them more accessible to all levels of like ability and education and reading level, was a big thing for me. Like, that's kind of my passion project right now, is like making tabletop 5e content accessible for small children.
Wow, that's really cool. And I think for some people who might know you just from, Trapped in the Birdcage or Hell's Bells, maybe a little surprising, because those shows in their content tend to lean a little bit more towards the adult side.
Yes, those are not for children.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're working on that and you're in that mindset, are you also in addition to story, how are you sort of making mechanics easier to grasp for younger people?
So the language and the vocabulary is pretty big. I feel like if children are playing, they're probably playing with an adult GM for the most part, especially given the age. I don't think a 6-year-old is going to be able to GM. I'm sure there's one or two out there, but they have like a shorter attention span. They just do. But it's changing the language or using words that could easily be understood by all levels. So, for instance, if I wanted to make a magic potion, and I wanted to have that potion make the player, whoever drank it, invisible, instead of like talking about like stealth modifiers or anything like that, just using very simple language that's like, when you drink this, you become invisible. Most children can understand what invisible means, but if they don't, it's like you cannot be seen, like nobody can see you. Just kind of thinking of it, if I needed to. Another great thing that I've been trying to do lately is I take content that is available now, like I'll flip through a book, and an exercise that I do for myself is, how would I explain this to somebody who's learning English for the first time? Like if they're an ESL learner, and that really gets like the cogs in my brain going, because somebody who is ESL is not going to understand what dexterity means, but I could tell them it's how fast you move, or like how quick your reflexes are, or like how nimble you are.
Wow, that's a really cool way to think about it, and it's a really cool project that you're working on with Kayla, who is a great artist and also one of the players in Hell's Bells, and I guess sort of a Holly Conrad double in some ways. I know that they refer to each other that way.
So mad.
But so just really brilliant stuff when you are in Hell's Bells, which is a great show that features a cast of players who are all women and non-binary players. How did that come to be? You know, how did Hell's Bells happen?
Well, if I'm honest, I wasn't there for a lot of the planning stuff, but I was introduced to a lot of the group. I was going to hiccup there. Introduced to a lot of the group, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And then somebody invited me to play, and that's how that went.
Oh, nice.
I just keep inserting myself into people's games. I'm like, I like this game. It'd be a shame if I started playing it.
And like you said, that's an all tiefling group, you're playing through Mazmataz, who is a wonderful DM. They are great. Is running a Modron Marchy adventure for you all. That is very, very fun. So you know, I think a lot of times, again, when people get their start in D&D, not only are they not playing in front of an audience of, you know, over 1,000 people, they are also, in general, playing sort of in one world. They're not dealing with the multiverse at first and that sort of thing. You were thrown right in with your games in Sigil, you know, dealing with different, you know, there's planes outside there. And even if you're not traveling to planes right away, there's planar forces, things from all over the D&D multiverse. How much do you know now about sort of the D&D cosmology and what's going on out there in the world? Because I feel like most people have been playing for less than a year. They're like, I'm learning what the Sword Coast in the Forgotten Realms is still, you know? Yeah.
It's definitely, again, it's one of those like, oh, just throw me right into the fire, which is fine. I feel like it's a great opportunity to kind of work backwards. Like, I've been slowly collecting like all of the adventure guides so I can like learn about Neverwinter and not Ravnica, that's later, that's coming out. Ravenloft, just thinking of. But like, Sigil is very, very interesting. The mechanics are a little bit different. The things you can do are a little bit different. The consequences of your action are very different. But I really enjoyed that because it's not something that a lot of people play. It's also a setting that I like as somebody who writes. Just a fantastic, interesting setting. It's like a floating city that looks like a donut. It's on top of a spire, but it's not the typical Western fantasy with like castles and knights. It's like, I don't want to say it's like Industrial Revolution, but that's what it kind of reminds me of, where everything's a little bit dirty, everything's a little bit dark. Nobody really knows who's good and bad. I enjoy that setting.
Yeah, I've been reading it lately, sort of to just go over it and refresh myself, and it's been incredible to see the you know, that it really does have that Industrial Revolution feel. You know, I always think it feels like 1800s London or something. Sigil.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, very similar to that.
Mm-hmm. And there's even one of the things that's strange about Sigil is there's this cant that, you know, this sort of slang that they use.
Planar cant.
Yes, yeah, which Holly knows pretty well, and uses quite a bit. Was that also a challenge, sort of working your way around the planar cant at first?
At first it was hard because like Holly would say things and I was like, what is this? And there's even like a kind of funny running joke where Reader also, because none of our actual characters are from Sigil, they were transported there against their will. It's funny to see like this ongoing joke that we have that Reader, Chad Quant's character, will not understand a word and like constantly want to know what it is and then incorrectly use it. Like the whole the word for money in Sigil is jink. Like that's planar cant. There's like a whole thing where it's like, what is jink? But yeah, I like the planar cant. It feels, again, very like 1800 London, like very Sweeney Todd. I like it a lot. I feel like it's like supposed to be like Cockney slang or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's really fascinating, and it's so much fun to see Trapped in the Birdcage. How would you say that things are different in your Hell's Bells game from Trapped in the Birdcage?
I feel like both of them are like, there are funny moments. I feel like it's Trapped in the Birdcage. There's more at stake for the characters, if that makes sense, without giving too much away. I feel like it's probably going to get a little bit darker as well. There's also not as many players, so there's an opportunity for the backstories to be explored a little bit more in depth. And what I have planned for Nejma will be an interesting, it'll just be very interesting. And I know that Trapped in the Birdcage shares the same timeline as Dice Kramer Action, which means it shares the timeline with the Adventure Zone. So it's like all linear somehow. I'm sure we will explore that as we go on.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how all of those stories gel together, because it also then has the same timeline as Acquisitions Incorporated, right?
Yes,
and
that's true.
The
Yes,
C-Team. So, yeah, it's sort of a big multiverse with all these. It's it's better than Marvel. It's great.
It is better than Marvel.
So like you said, you're playing on a Star Trek show right here on Encounter Roleplay. How are you finding different role-playing game systems? You said you like mechanics and that sort of thing. So how have you found diving into other systems like the Star Trek system?
Star Trek system is really difficult for me to grasp because I am so used to the 5e rules. I'm sure I'll get it playing a little bit more. I do think it's interesting that people are just coming up with like their own game mechanics, and maybe one day I'll get there. That is like 10 years in the future for me at the very least. I will say that I do prefer the 5e rules. No tea, no shade, just a preference. I feel like if I can channel like the character that I play, it's more logical. I think the character building for the Star Trek game is very interesting, and it's very well thought out. So I'm enjoying it. I like Star Trek. I could stand to brush up on it. I haven't watched it in a while, but I do like playing a Vulcan. I like being logical for once, because that is not my characters for Dungeons & Dragons at all. One of them is a small child and an idiot, and the other one is a pyromaniac who has thinks everybody loves her, which they don't.
But that's the best way, is to have if you have the delusion of people liking you, then you don't need to change. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's interesting about Star Trek is that that system, I think, is a fun system. I too, no tea, no shade, am a preferrer of 5th edition, and I think the rules are laid out weird in that Modiphius book. Like, it feels not as straightforward, and it might just be it's not a thing that I am used to. So I'm glad to hear you say that that you're having trouble grasping on, because I too am having trouble grasping on. So I think that makes perfect sense. Are there any other role-playing games that you have tried or are interested in checking out now that you've sort of jumped into the world?
Well, yes, but I will say that if anybody wants to play the Star Trek game and they're confused about the rules, I feel like outside of the people that worked on the book, the person that knows the rules the best is going to be Blue Jay. I can come to her with any question about the rules, and she just knows how it works or how to find it, so that's awesome. I love her. Another role-playing game that I played not too terribly long ago, and they're going to be featured at Geek Girl Con, and I want to get like a physical copy. I wasn't able to get one during their Kickstarter. It's called BFF, and it's like a legitimate role-playing game where there are no GMs. You're all just telling a story together as like middle school girls. It's very cute. I streamed it once and it was fantastic. It was Tay Dow, who was one of the artists of the game. My friend Mia Moore, who is a cosplayer. My friend Camille, who is part of Pretty Brown and Nerdy, and then Kaden Jensen from Rooster Teeth. We all played together, and it was a fantastic story. You just weave the story. You're hanging out as middle school girls. I would love to play that again sometime. I should play that again sometime.
Wow, that sounds great. That sounds really fun.
It's very low. It's like low pressure. It's a great game to play just to like kind of decompress, I feel, and just have fun. Not that none of the other games are fun, but there's like, you feel like the stakes are really high. But for this, it's like an actual relaxing experience. I'll tweet about it later so people can go and find it.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, you've been doing this since February. You have jumped in both feet. You've really made an impact, and I think made your mark on the community in a great way. What are some of the things you're most proud of that you've done so far in the tabletop gaming community?
Oh man, I'm one of those people that I don't want to say that I'm humble, because I'm not. It's more of like, I have a hard time recognizing my own accomplishments, but I've been doing an exercise where I like write all the cool stuff that I've been doing, and that's helped quite a bit. But I think like my highlight was, well, we'll do three. We'll do top three, and I'll start with like, you know, those MTV countdowns where they do 3 first, and then they get to 1, a big reveal. I will say, getting to meet a lot of people that I played with on these online games. We all met up. Most of us were able to meet up at PAX and meet in person and do fun things, and I really enjoyed that. So that's number 3. No offense that it's not number 1. I think number 1 is going to be pretty self-explanatory. Number 2 is like completely self-centered, where somebody had me sign one of their original, it was the original starter kit for Dungeons & Dragons, the red box. Wow. Somebody had me sign that at PAX, and I was like, are you sure? And it took convincing to get me to sign something, because there were other people who were like way cooler on that box, but they really wanted me to sign it, so I did. And then number 1 was getting to help co-teach the middle school Dungeons & Dragons. That is always number 1. It'll always be number 1 for me, because my whole, like, when I found D&D to be like the thing, the reason that it was a thing was like I could finally figure out a way to help people in a way that I wanted to be helped when I was that way, and that was making the rules more accessible for everyone, especially kids. And that is super, super number 1 for me. It will always be number 1, getting to play with those fantastic, amazing girls. I played with some very funny, very sweet young people, and I need to talk to Ethan to see if I can drop in someday. I know that they were doing their club, and I was supposed to help out with that, but he decided that he wanted the girls to DM, and I think that's the perfect move. But I'm going to stop in one of these days.
That's amazing. So how did that come about? You know, like what was the, who asked you to do that, and how was that made?
Well, Ethan asked me if I wanted to. I had seen, I don't remember who tweeted it into my timeline, where it was like this group of girls doing amazing Dungeons & Dragons stuff. And I reached out to Ethan, and I was like, hey, if there's anything that they need, do they need dice, do they need books? Like, I am in a spot right now where I can just like financially help you. I'll buy them books, I'll buy them dice. Like, do they need like fun character sheets? Because like the character sheets are not super great. I'm like, what can I do? Like, I would love to come and talk to them. And he was like, yeah, let's talk. And then it started like picking up speed from there, and that's how I eventually did that. And I'm like, once I met Ethan in person, I'm like, this is my dude. This is a person I want to be in their corner. I want them to be in my corner. This is the person who's doing good stuff, and I need to surround myself with good people.
Wow. So when you think about D&D and its ability to connect people, do you think there's a potential for other great things like what you did when you went and taught with those girls?
Oh yeah, for sure. I see, like, I'm friends with a lot of, like, I don't want to say like celebrities, because I don't understand the concept of celebrity. I just don't. There are a lot of like really important people in the community that a lot of people look up to, and I've been kind of like taking notes of the reactions that they seem to get for certain things. I if I'm honest, I'm not caught up on like every single actual play that my friends are involved in because it's so much content. It's just way too much content. I want to get there. Maybe I need to take like a vacation or a sabbatical where I just want like catch up. But I've seen some of the things that people have said to my friends in the community that have been exceptionally touching, and I think it's Dungeons and Dragons itself, as a player, you get the opportunity to kind of work through some things, but I also know that people seek out stories that mirror their own to work through some things if they're not at a point where they're ready to tell them themselves. And I think Dungeons and Dragons is really good for that because for the most part, Dungeons and Dragons is a safe place as a game. It should be anyway. If it's not, there's a problem. But I think people can kind of work through issues that they really want to work on in a fantasy setting where they as a person won't be harmed. Their character might be harmed. Mm-hmm. My character gets hurt a lot. Or even, I read something, I'll find the link, where somebody said that they used the death of a character to work through like actual death acceptance. I'm like, damn, that's deep as hell. I love that. Just working through real world issues in almost like a simulated environment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And you hear people say all the time that they discovered things about themselves or worked through something because of Dungeons and Dragons and because of role-playing games. And I think it's great to see that in action, and it's great to hear other people say that there is potential for that as well. Because it's just there's so many good things, and like you can have so much fun playing role-playing games, but I think you can really do more with them too, which is great. And it's a great way to connect with people on a way that maybe is not always easy to do when you're just hanging out trying to have a conversation, which is always fun, to be like, well, we can have a conversation as a dwarf and an elf. Maybe that makes it easier, right? And that's good too. What are some of your hopes for the future of the tabletop gaming industry, in RPGs specifically?
I feel like tabletop, especially this particular community, has the ability to be very low ego, and I would love to see it get there. I have interacted with people that maybe not so much, and I would like to see that change. I am seeing, like, to like make a pun, but I am seeing the game table get bigger, and I want to see it get bigger. And I tell people all the time on Twitter, if they're like going to be tearing each other down, I'm like, ooh, there's room for all of us at this table. There's plenty of room. There's no limit to how many people can play this game, I promise. Not everybody is going to make a fortune off of it or get famous, but that's really not the point either. You're just having a good time with people you trust, and you're playing a game. You're going on an adventure in a day and age where you might not be able to do that. I think that's kind of the point, is you're doing fantastic things with people you care about in a safe setting.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the best ways to spend time, and I know you agree. What about for you personally? Do you have any sort of personal goals in this industry that you would like to achieve yourself one day?
I have many. I started like, I've always been like a list maker and somebody that sets goals for themselves. Like I do once a month, I'll like post about 5 small goals that I want to accomplish, and then I have overarching like year-long goals and like things I want to do before I turn 30 and like things I want to accomplish in 10 years. And I have a list now that like D&D things I want to do, and a lot of them I feel like if I say anything, then now I'm held accountable for actually doing them. I would love to do more with Bramblefoot Adventures. I have some ideas. I would love to do more D&D writing for sure, especially narrative style writing. More games. Play more games. I'll play more games.
That's great. There's one thing I should have asked you about a while ago. as far as your experience, so you started as a player. Obviously, you've run some games now. When did you make that leap into running your first D&D game as a DM?
Well, it was the summer camp, so I don't want to say that doesn't count. I feel, if anything, my experience counts more. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm just going to speak the truth.
I agree.
Running games for children is no picnic. People think that their party is bad. Running games for 6, 11-year-olds is immensely difficult because their attention span is like so small, and they are at the age where they're asking so many questions about everything, and they absolutely should be. But every time that I would say something, they wanted to know why. Why did this happen? Why didn't this happen? Well, I did this. They're all tiny Patrick Rothfuses. They want to know how they can bend the rules to fit their narrative. And especially running games with kids, they're learning certain social behaviors for the first time, like waiting their turn. They're learning new social hierarchy as well, like, oh, this particular person is a grade above me, so they're like my superior in some way. It's very interesting. So I feel like now that I've run a game for kids, I could run a game for anybody. If I could run a game for literally anybody on this earth at this point, I feel like I have that potential. The reason I did it was like out of a necessity. These girls needed somebody to facilitate the storytelling for them, and I was more than willing to do it. I love telling stories. Fantasy will always be my first number one love, so I was more than willing to do it. And I, in my mind, which is I'm sure every DM out there is like either cringing or laughing at me in this very hollow manner, where I was like, if I can play, I can run a game. Different. So different, especially if you like start off running a game for kids who have no attention span. Some of them I could tell at certain points didn't want to be there, which is fine. But yeah.
Yeah.
It was necessary, and I would love to do some more. So we'll see.
Yeah, that is a heck of a way. The same way you started as a player, as a DM, you got thrown right into the deep end, because not only was it with kids, it was with kids who didn't know the rules and that sort of thing. A lot of us play with like, we're going to DM our friends, but they trust us. They're willing to cut us some slack. They might know the rules and can help us out a little bit. That is a very, very different experience. You definitely get extra credit, and anyone who says that doesn't count should go try to do it themselves.
Yes, and I would love to see that happen.
I think also that work that you're doing with Bramblefoot and when you go and teach children to run games is super important for the community overall, because if you can get kids started early, it's good for the health of the game and the community, right? We know that things aren't going to stop after we are too old and arthritic to roll dice,
Right.
And that is huge. And also because young people have great ideas and bring them to the table and change the game, and we're going to see all kinds of great stuff like that. So I just want to take a second to thank you for that work, because it is some of the most important work that can be done in the hobby, and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody else in the community does as well, especially because not everybody has the patience to sit down with children and teach them how to play this very complicated game.
Patience is heteromout. It is required. It's not just patience, it's patience and it's understanding. And it's also not just, you have to kind of, I know for a lot of DMs, they're like, this is my story, and that's fine. But you also need to realize that the story that you're telling with children is now their story. And that can be a whole thing. And if you want to DM kids, you need to be prepared to hear things that you might not be ready to hear, because children use role-playing a lot as a way to express themselves in a way that they don't know how. And I know for a lot of people who haven't dealt with children are just not ready for that yet. an example, and I think this is a really important example, is during the summer game, there is a student that is going, like her parents are going through a divorce, and a lot of that came out in the game, but apparently she had never talked about it before. So a lot of people who aren't ready to hear that, they can find it very shocking. And but your job as the DM of children is to provide a safe environment for them to express themselves. And I know a lot of people, their first instinct would be to like dig deeper, but you don't need to. Kids will tell you everything that they feel the need to tell you, whether you want to hear it or not.
Definitely. Yeah, that is, wow, that's really something that, that's just an incredible story about the power of role-playing games. And you also, I think of as a champion for inclusivity in games. I remember watching the first episode of Hell's Bells, and everybody going around and introducing themselves and mentioning the pronouns that you go by, which I think is a great thing to do. And obviously there was a little pushback from the community about that, and you all still do that, which is great. And I just remember being touched by you saying, everybody was saying their preferred pronouns, and you saying, like, I think for everybody, they're actually required pronouns.
They are required.
And that being a really cool thing. And I was just wondering if you could talk about the importance of inclusivity, not just in our community, obviously, but in all communities, and how you've been helping do that with gaming.
Well, I've always been like, regardless of my hobbies, I've always kind of been the odd one out. I grew up in a really rural part of northern Florida, where I was one of the only people of color at my school, and so that was kind of tough. But as I've gotten older, I've noticed more and more how different I was and still continue to be. But I know that real life doesn't look like that. And even I always kind of have to laugh at people who try and like blah 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 historical accuracy. I'm like, open a book. Black people weren't invented in 1800. They've been around for literally forever. They were literally everywhere. I think, and not even just that, like, there have always been people of color literally everywhere since the dawn of the human existence. It's just how it's been. It's how it will continue to be. People are mad about that. I don't know. Maybe go live on the moon. I don't care what you do. But especially a lot of these things are fantasy castles and dragons, and a lot of people that reads very white. For me, it doesn't. One of my favorite things to like tell people that like blows their minds is things like the idea, like a bard, for example. Back in like 1300s, 1200s, 1300s, most of the entertainers in like royal courts were all like Berbers or from Morocco, so they were black, and that was just like the thing, like to get somebody like a Berber or somebody from North Africa to perform for you was like this status thing. So like having like some pimply faced white dude, not as great as having like North African musicians. Like that was the thing. And in the Regency period, a lot of really wealthy families from Iran and the Gulf would send their children to medical school and to learn to be like gentlemen and gentle ladies in England. So there's totally the idea that if we were to rewrite Pride and Prejudice, the Bennett sisters probably would have run into one of these Persian gentlemen at some fancy ball. It's just how it would have been, because they were wealthy and they were going to be doctors and gentlemen, and they probably would have run into them. And I want my fantasy to reflect real life, and brown people have been in real life forever. But I also, on the other hand, it's like I want my fantasy to reflect a fantastic experience. So I don't want to have to deal with racism. And like my trepidation with the popularity of tieflings is a lot of people see it as a way to be like, oh, I'm like, people don't like me because of my race. And I'm like, that's not a fantasy for me. That's a reality, and I don't like it. I think we could expound on that for sure. Like, what is it about tieflings that people don't like? That like they're the devil? Like, fine, use it to your advantage, but I want to be doing fantastic things where I'm not barred from doing them from my race. So there's that.
Definitely. Well, yeah, thank you for speaking about that, because I think it is really important, and I love that you draw the parallel in real world history, because I think a lot of people will use real history as a defense to be racist in their games and sort of and exclude, you know, people of color and that sort of thing from their world. And it's like, well, no, that's not the case. So I am glad to. I think that's awesome that you're doing it that way. So we're wrapping up here. So my second to last question before we get to like where people can find you and stuff is just, what advice do you have for people who want to do what you want to do?
So my first thing of advice is do it because you're going to have fun. Don't do it because you want to be the next like Christopher Perkins or Matt Mercer, because they're already Christopher Perkins and Matt Mercer, and they're very good at being those people because they are those people. Focus on being the best you, and wonderful things will come. My whole thing is like, I don't like, yes, I want to write fantastic adventures, but I don't want to be the next James Introcaso, because you're already James Introcaso and you're doing a very good job at being him. I want to be the best Hadeel. I've decided that's my main goal. Another thing, because I see it happen from time to time, probably like once a week, where people take the game a little too seriously. And I noticed it. Liking rules is totally awesome. I love rules, but rules are not the end all be out of the game. It's a game, and you should be having fun. You should be having so much fun with your family and friends, going out on a wonderful adventure where you can ride dragons and cast spells, and maybe don't focus on the rules so much if the story is just that good. I went to the Adventure Zone yesterday, and story was wonderful, but the magic of that was kind of taken away from people constantly reminding the players of the rules, what they can and cannot do. I think like I was so engaged in the story, and the only thing that took me out, even though I know the rules, was people pointing out that the rules were wrong. And it's like, oh, like that's kind of, it's like, imagine going to this fantastic movie and then just one guy in the front just pops up and goes, it was wrong. Do you guys see that? It's wrong. And I'm like, shut up. I paid to be here. Shut up. That's the kind of thing that I don't like. But yeah, focus on being the best you, telling your own unique story, and do it because it's fun. And it's only a game. It's only a game.
That is a perfect place for us to leave it. But before we go, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Twittysuch, TWITTYSUCH. I'm also on Instagram as that, and twitch.tv/Twittysuch, and I'm trying to do more there. I'm being bullied into doing YouTube stuff, but that's a whole other thing. You can also find me on patreon.com/BramblefootAdventures if you want to get some all ages content. We just released a really, really fantastic item that I'm so proud of at the $5 tier. And you can find me on Thursdays and Sundays on twitch.tv/D&D.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me. People can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso and at worldbuilderblog.com and don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Join us next week when my guest will be Kat Cool, who is an amazing game designer and podcaster and voice actor. Hadeel, thank you so much, and we will see everybody next week.
Thank you for having me.